Good afternoon again. I just want to welcome everybody to our How to Overcome Supply Chain Issues today and tomorrow. I'm Terry Reed. I'm the Senior Vice President for Entrepreneurial Development here at the El Paso Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And we're going to go ahead and get started. And I would love to thank everybody that is signing on today and welcome to our session. This is being brought to you through the SBA National Community Navigator Pilot Program. El Paso and the El Paso Hispanic Chamber are spokes in this brand new grant. Let me tell you a little bit about this program. So the vision of the SBA National Community Navigator Pilot Program is to reduce barriers that entrepreneurs face due to the economic downturn still happening today as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The EPHCC, in partnership with the U.S. Hispanic Chamber, is creating awareness about SBA programs and services for small, minority, and rural businesses. Some of the benefits of the Navigator program are to help our clients to access financing, free high-quality technical assistance in English and Spanish, business development, relief and recovery, access to new markets, and access to contracting opportunities. Some of the other resources through our Entrepreneurial Technical Assistance Centers are the Women's Business Border Center. This is a joint partnership of the Hispanic Chamber and the U.S. Small Business Administration. The MBDA Business Center, which is funded by the U.S. Department of Commerce and operated by the Hispanic Chamber, and our Minority Women's Enterprise Diversity Center, originally funded by the U.S. Department of Commerce as well, and which is now our training center located at 4141 Pinnacle. Let me give you a couple of housekeeping items as we get started. We want this to be a very robust discussion. Please submit your questions through the chat or the Q&A feature at any time throughout the presentation. After our discussion, we're going to be posing questions to our experts, and hopefully they will be able to respond to all the questions that come in. We are on Facebook Live. The session is being recorded, and you will be able to get a copy of it after the session. Let me start by introducing our speakers very briefly, and I will send the full resume to all of our participants as well. Michael Garcia is the director of the Mike Loya Center for Innovation and Commerce at UTEP. The center helps develop a culture for entrepreneurship through research and collaboration. Professor Garcia has a master's degree in science and program management. Before he retired from White Sands Missile Range, Mr. Garcia made national TV on CNN representing the U.S. Army on their Y2K efforts. That seems like so long ago. I remember Y2K. He retired from the United States Civil Service after over 34 years. Mr. Garcia is a recipient of the Commander's Civilian Service Medal and the Department of Army Civilian Achievement Medal for his time of work. And his contact information is also listed there. We'll get that to you again in the chat and when we send the presentation to you. Mr. Garcia, thank you so much for being with us. Let me introduce our second speaker, and then we'll start with Mr. Garcia. Frank Spencer III is the president of Aztec Contractors, as well as partner and chairman of Blue Line Architectural, which is headquartered in Harrisonburg, Virginia, with offices in Houston, Texas. He graduated from NEMI and earned a BA from Texas A&M. The objective of Aztec Contractors is to build a strong foundation, strong experience, a strong organization, and consistent communication. Mr. Spencer bought his company with $1,000 and has turned that into a multi-million-dollar construction firm. Frank has been recognized by the El Paso as the El Paso Minority Small Business Champion by the SBA and Construction Firm of the Year by the MBDA. He is a member of the El Paso Hispanic Chamber Board of Directors, and he is a past president of the El Paso 8A and Government Contractors Association. You'll see Frank's contact information on the screen as well, but we will get that to you again in just a moment. I'm going to stop my share and we're going to start our presentation in just 1 second. Hold on for just a minute. And we're going to go directly to a small video to get started. Hang on just 1 second. Goodness. Mr. Garcia, I am not having that video come up. I am so sorry. We will play it at the end of your presentation, but I'm going to turn the screen over to you to get started with your PowerPoint, and we'll fix this little technical glitch in just a moment.
Thank you so much, Terry. No problem at all, really. It was just a few seconds of introduction, so it's no problem. We don't even have to play it, Terry. I'll just do a little song and dance before I start. Well, thank you all so much, Terry, Jessica, Liliana. I'm very glad to be here, Mr. Spencer. It was very nice to meet you. I'm so glad to be here presenting today with you. I think it's going to be great. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to take a look today at these global supply chain issues at a kind of a high level. It's something that we study a lot at UTEP in the College of Business, where I teach operations management and quality management and service operations management, among other things. It's very interesting what's happening in the global supply chain. I'm going to talk about it in terms of something really simple. Let me share my screen here and we'll get started in just a second. Can you all see that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, wonderful. So y'all, I'm going to talk about this in terms of something really simple. A USB charger. Everybody's got one or two or three. Everybody's ordered one from Amazon or eBay. Everybody's gone down to Walmart or even Circle K or something to buy one. And you know, when you click with your mouse on eBay or Amazon on that USB charger, you click on it, you pay 20 bucks maybe, including shipping, and a day later, maybe 2 days later, it's there on your doorstep. And nobody ever stops to think what actually happened, what was actually initiated by that click of your mouse on that little picture of a USB charger. Seems simple, right? But it actually engaged this incredible series of events in a system that is probably the most complex and most intricate system ever created by human beings, which is the global supply chain that we rely on for just about everything that we consume every day. And when you click on that little picture, you engage this system in a process that probably started maybe a year ago, at least 9 months ago, in a country half a world away, in Vietnam, for example, where a lot of USB chargers are made. And then that piece of material had to cover a 14,000-mile journey of transport that utilized countless transportation, storage, automation, and delivery modes. And there was virtually no human contact on your part during that process, and you paid virtually nothing for it. Maybe $3 or $4 or $5, maybe $10 if you wanted it the next day. And what this does is it gives the illusion of immediate availability and low cost that is very, very dependent on super inexpensive transport, super inexpensive labor, a very benign global business, political, and social environment that we have enjoyed over the last 40 years, where that environment was designed and optimized for things to be perfect. And that whole system has been humming along for decades because things have been pretty nice. But the real challenge with this globalization and this global network is that it's extremely vulnerable to disruption by things like a global social issue, like a pandemic, or a global conflict, like the Russia-Ukraine war. Things that have happened many times before. We've seen pandemics before. We've seen other global social issues before. We've had world wars before. Why didn't anybody think that those things could happen again? Well, they did. And that system was very fragile and very vulnerable to disruption. And that is exactly what we are experiencing today, a colossal and now long-term disruption of those perfect conditions that existed for so long. So what are those conditions anyway? What really happens in that supply chain and why is it messed up? Well, the first thing that happens, the first challenge is container shipping. How do we get that thing from Vietnam, 14,000 miles away, to the United States? Well, it's got to go into a container and get on a giant container ship and then cross the Pacific Ocean, 8,167 miles, 20 to 30 days at sea on a ship that's carrying maybe as many as 10,000 containers, but only has 20 crew members. So there's huge pressure on those crew members, and it's really hard to find crew for these ships because it's so much pressure and it takes so long. Can you imagine being at sea for 20 or 30 days at a time all year long? And since these companies get paid by the ton, the bigger the ship is, the more money they make. And the bigger they get, the more expensive and the more challenging they are to build and own, which represents a huge barrier to any kind of expansion. Only a few companies in the world can actually afford to build and buy and operate these ships. So it's very difficult to expand capacity, which is desperately needed right now. The bigger they are, the longer it takes to load and unload them. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. Right? It's taking longer and longer to unload ships, twice as long today as it did pre-pandemic. So the bigger they get, the more it's loaded on them, the more they become a giant single point of failure. If one ship sinks, if one ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, then you're going to have this giant interruption because it's a huge single point of failure. There's one other interesting issue that as all of this ground to a halt, mostly because of labor issues at ports all around the world. What happened to those containers is they wound up in all the wrong places. Before, there was a very finely tuned system where containers would go from one place to another, goods would be unloaded, those containers would be filled up with things that needed to go back the other way, and you had this very efficient, cost-effective system where you never shipped an empty container. As things ground to a halt in 2020 and 2021, increasingly those containers wound up left in places empty where they didn't need to be. And now most of them are stranded in places where they don't need to be, and nobody wants to pay to ship them empty back to where they need to be, because it costs almost as much to ship them empty as it does to ship them full. So then what happens? So let's say we do make it to the port. So then our USB charger has to be unloaded into a port in LA or Long Beach. These are two of the largest ports in the United States. Actually, they're two of the largest ports in the Western Hemisphere. And the fact is, those two ports handle 40% of US imports and 30% of US exports. So that means that 70% of the material going into and out of the United States to foreign ports is going through there. So it's another giant single point of failure that if anything happens there, like it has, then everything is going to be held up across the entire nation because the majority of the nation's port capability is in these two places. And they're huge places, 15,000 unionized longshore workers, 900,000 containers per month when things were working normally. Before the pandemic, it would take 3 to 5 days to unload a ship, but now it's taking up to 2 weeks. For one simple reason, they're out of room. There's so much demand and so much material coming in that they are out of physical space. So they have to stack the containers higher and higher and higher. It takes longer and longer to do this, particularly if you have to unstack them to sort and move the material to the terminal where trucks can pick the stuff up. Well, let's say you wanted to go from a regular day to 24/7. Sounds simple, right? You just change the hours. Well, not so simple, because the port is not operated by a single entity. There's a longshore union, there's a terminal workers union, you have a city government, a county government, a federal port authority, and then lines and lines of private and semi-private truckers that are there to pick things up. And so everybody has to coordinate and agree, for example, if they're going to shift to a 24/7 day or any other kind of adaptation. And the simple fact is there's just not enough capacity to meet demand. And container ships are waiting out there in the bay for days at a time. And if you look at the news, you'll see these pictures of these giant container ships lined up out in the bay in front of LA, just waiting to be unloaded because there isn't enough capacity. Well, even if you can get the stuff unloaded, and even if you can get the Port Authority to operate 24 hours a day, could you find truckers that are willing to go there in the middle of the night and operate 24 hours a day? It's increasingly difficult because those truckers, many of them, half of them, are private or semi-private contractors. And the Port Authority is emphasizing that other members of the supply chain, not just them that are operating the port, need to step up to meet this increased demand, because what they really need is more material to be shipped out faster because they're overloaded. So we can take a look at this. This is another central issue that we're dealing with in the supply chain. And that's the whole business of truck drivers and who is willing to drive a truck these days. Well, today, most drivers are professional career drivers with 30 years plus experience, and they're mostly in their 60s. And you know what? They're not being replaced. And this is evidenced very clearly by the fact that there are 3 million registered truckers in the US, but there are 10 million people that have commercial driver's licenses who are qualified to be truckers, but they're not signing up to be truckers. And so for some reason, there's a fading interest in what used to be one of the best blue collar jobs in the country, driving a truck. Well, here's part of the reason why. It's really a challenging work. Typically on the road 2 weeks at a time, 3,000 to 4,000 miles driving per week, to be paid just 70 cents a mile, where a typical day is 7 hours of waiting for loading at that overloaded port. More hours waiting for inspections and doing regulatory paperwork, and then 7 to 8 hours driving, and then a 10-hour federally mandated rest period, where there's a lot of federal regulation regarding that rest period. So there's not enough truckers now, evidenced by those 3 million and 10 million that have driver's licenses and don't want to sign up. And the expectation is there will be 160,000 more vacancies in the over-the-road trucking industry in the next 10 years, unfilled. And it's not an issue of interest or recognition, but just not enough people willing to do this job anymore under these conditions for this pay. And I think Mr. Spencer is experiencing a similar thing in the construction industry. Well, so here's some other things. It turns out that the trucking industry was deregulated in the 1980s and has been in decline as a profession ever since. And it's very fragmented. And so there's this patchwork of individual and private contractors, small and medium-sized companies, and then large corporate entities. And those large entities, they have all the data, they have all the market information. So they are driving the location of distribution centers and the prices, and they're squeezing out the smaller carriers where you have the greatest potential for expansion. And finally, there just isn't enough over-the-road infrastructure. And so, even if you had more trucks, there'd be no place for them to fuel up, no place for them to park to get the mandatory 10-hour rest that they're supposed to get, no place to get service, just don't have enough over-the-road infrastructure. Another reason that people are discouraged from picking up the trucking industry as a profession. Well, so if you can get a truck to take the thing, then eventually it's going to arrive at a giant fulfillment center, a huge warehouse, kind of like the Amazon one that was built way out here on the east side, 3 to 4 million square feet of space, where there's an extremely fast-paced and physically demanding operation in sorting, storing, picking, and final packaging, where all of this is done to fulfill the famous Amazon promise, which a few years ago was 3 days and then went to 2 days and then went to 1 day. And now in a lot of places, it's same day. where you only have to wait a couple of hours to get that thing to your doorstep. And this drive, this ever decreasing amount of time that people are willing to wait, is driving a huge push towards technology and automation, and robots, automated storage and retrieval, automated picking, which of course drives higher cost. That automation is not cheap, very expensive to buy and operate and maintain. And you know what? Those things are not replacing humans. They are augmenting what humans are doing. There are still hundreds of thousands of humans in these warehouses. But as the automation is put in, it also drives higher performance requirements on the human workers. They have to keep up with those robots. And it really is driving a high level of stress and burnout. Last year, Amazon reported that they had nearly 100% annual turnover in their centers, 100% turnover. Can you imagine how difficult that is? What happens there is that their onboarding process is done in about 3 days. So they can recruit, train, and place somebody in 3 days. They have to in order to keep up with that turnover. And so there's been this fundamental shift in the way people shop, right? Where instead of you going out there to buy something and you get it and you bring it home, somebody else does that for you. Well, who's going to do that work, right? The truth is there are not enough people who want to do that work. And just like trucking, there's going to be 100,000 plus jobs open in this area without enough people willing to do this work under these conditions and for the pay that's currently being offered. So the next thing. Oh, there are a couple of other interesting things about this. One is these centers tend to cluster because they need to be near major highways and thoroughfares, and they typically go in places where the land is cheap, right? So they cluster together. This is great because it gives workers some leverage because they can go right across the street and get $1 an hour more or whatever it is, but this drives up labor costs and also increases turnover. So the next thing, let me see here. So out of the fulfillment center is the last mile delivery. This is where this item is going to be taken to your door. And today, this is normally done by the Postal Service or UPS or FedEx. With that driver, if you happen to be there when they arrive, might be the only human interaction that you had in this whole process, interestingly enough. And those drivers, they're career professionals. They're highly paid, up to $40 an hour. They're generally unionized, or they work for the federal government with excellent benefits. And they have fixed routes and fixed capacities. So this system is highly optimized and very, very expensive. And the system that brings you little USB chargers from Vietnam is going to need a much cheaper alternative to be sustainable. It's not going to be sustainable with this kind of last mile delivery. So enter then Amazon Flex, which is like Uber for packages, where you have private contractors like Uber drivers that use their own vehicles. They assume all the cost and liability. They pay for their own gas. They pay for their own maintenance. If they get in an accident, it's up to them to take care of it. They're paid about 18 bucks an hour for a 3-hour block, maybe up to $45 an hour at peak time, like the holidays. And the next step up is what we call Amazon Delivery Service Partner, or DSP, which is a franchise operation where Amazon will rent you a fleet of trucks and uniforms and training manuals and that sort of thing. They do the packaging and the dispatching, and the franchisee does the driving and assumes all the cost of operation and liability. And by 2020, Amazon DSP had already captured 21% of the last mile market. It's greater than FedEx, which was only 16%. But the challenge with this is that this shift of liability away from the company to the private individual or franchisee, they're assuming all the risk and all the cost. Not enough capacity here for sure, either among the higher cost options, the Postal Service, UPS, FedEx, or the Amazon options. Again, more than 100,000 more last mile delivery drivers are going to be needed in the next 10 years to keep up with e-commerce demand. And the challenge is, who will want to do this work? What is really happening with Amazon Flex and Amazon DSP is a deregulation similar to what happened in the trucking industry, which was one of the major contributors to the decline in the number of people in the trucking industry. So we're probably going to wind up in the same boat as we were with over-the-road trucking with last mile delivery. So what can we do about all of this? Well, the first thing I think is that we need to reshore and nearshore manufacturing and raw material supply and focus on our neighbors, Canada and Mexico. One way to deal with this is to make that trip shorter. Instead of 14,000 miles, make it 2,000 or 3,000 miles right here next door. Develop other capacity in the Western Hemisphere, Central America and South America. Now, this sounds easy, because it's easy to go from a high-cost economy to a low-cost economy, like from the US to Vietnam. But to come back from a low-cost economy like Vietnam to a higher-cost economy like we have in the Western Hemisphere, that's more challenging, but I believe it can be done. What's going to happen is we're going to have to be willing to pay more. We really do need to increase port and terminal capacity. This is a government infrastructure and policy issue. I'm glad to see that the Biden administration had passed their infrastructure bill, which includes some of this. Need to increase long-haul trucking capacity by at least 160,000 drivers. We need to focus on training, education, apprenticeships, financial assistance program, and try to keep up the professional nature of the work. We need good blue-collar jobs in the United States. We need to defragment that industry and create something a little more uniform. We need to increase distribution center capacity while also mitigating the effects of clustering, expand automation, while at the same time thinking about the needs of human workers and maintaining enough human workers, keeping humans in the loop, upskilling those workers to be better able to integrate with technology and increase the professional nature of that work so more people will want to do that work. And finally, increase last mile delivery capacity by at least 100,000 drivers, doing the same thing of mitigating the de-skilling of that work and not wind up with a unprofessional situation like we were driven to in the trucking industry, and also mitigate this shift of liability and cost all to the private operator and make sure the big companies assume their fair share of those costs. These are private industry policy issues and that may only be fixed by some increased federal regulation. So y'all, that was a real quick overview of what's happening. Every piece of material that goes into and outside of the United States is being affected by these things. Not too many people think about them. So I just wanted to put them out there for your consideration. And I'll give it over to Mr. Spencer now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Frank.
No, I just wanted to thank Mr. Garcia for that detailed report. I mean, again, it goes back to that notion of, we can learn from the past, and it just seems like we think it's never going to happen again. But, these are huge indicators that we need to learn from what has happened in our past and prepare accordingly. So thank you, Mr. Garcia, for your report.
You bet. You're welcome, Frank.
So, Frank, we do have some questions that I'd like to address with you so that we can hear your perspective. And again, going back to some of the things that Mr. Garcia presented in his presentation, but how has Aztec been able to manage the increased cost of goods and materials and still maintain a good profit margin? You're in the construction industry. Will you share that with us?
Sure, absolutely. And a lot of my responses are going to be tailored towards the construction industry. And I don't mean to leave anybody out, but I feel like there will be some parallels through other industries that might be listening to this webinar. But yeah, I think that the key to our ability to maintain a good profit with increased cost and obviously a shortage of supply is discipline. We have to stay disciplined in our trade and embrace the true meaning of being a builder. That is with having the right people on your staff that are managing these jobs, the right suppliers, the right subcontractors, the right laborers, because now even more so than ever, it's so important to be able to be flexible, adaptable to the changes that are happening. And so the attention to schedule, that's one thing that consistently leads our projects, is we have to maintain the integrity of a schedule that you start from the onset of a project all the way to the completion of that project. And so with those things in mind, the consistency and the communication with our suppliers, our subcontractors, and most importantly, our owners, has been the key to some of our successes. But, we got to get down to the fact that being profitable now is a challenge, and it's going to continue to be so. So knowing this and going back to those lessons learned, really formulating a blueprint and strategizing, staying proactive and managing the process and operations that contribute to margins and profitability, and adding efficiencies to optimize wherever possible. So those could be some of the recommendations I would make, and those are things that we're currently doing.
Right, thank you. Have you had to diversify your supply chain due to the transportation and scarcity that we're currently facing in the markets? And if so, from where?
Yeah, so there was some some steel that was coming through Mexico that was getting bottlenecked there at our borders, and we weren't able to get that material to our job site. So again, now we have relocated or looked for other routes to get our material from. Our sister state, New Mexico, has been a huge advocate of some of our material supply routes. So yes, indeed, we've even gone so far as to, on some of the steel, speaking with people from Colombia and other countries to see what options we have available. And so I would say that would be another thing, is really pay attention to the global market and see what other countries are doing that we can take and apply here. For example, prefabricated, rock walls. I mean, we have obviously concrete, there's a shortage, masonries, there's a shortage. So it's looking to get creative in terms of what other means and methods you can use to be able to provide your product and still hit your mark and maintain your profitability.
And that goes back directly to Mr. Garcia's presentation about nearshoring and looking at things that are available closer to us to help to avoid some of those issues. How have you supported your company improvement in cost efficiency through long-term supplier relationships?
Yeah, so even now more than ever, it's all about relationships. You have to develop those relationships with your suppliers, your vendors, your subcontractors. One of the things that listening to Mr. Garcia and his report, and then kind of the aha moment, is that when everything's going well, materials are showing up on time. These are things that are out of sight, out of mind. You don't think about, but now, when's the last time we can ask ourselves that we personally, in person, went and met with our suppliers or vendors, just to even say, hey, how are our payment schedules with you guys? Are subcontractors paying you well? Are we paying you on time? Discuss some of the terms, if you have any, with those suppliers. I mean, that little notion of just simply communicating with your suppliers and building that relationship can go a long ways to saying, look, we're in desperate need of this material. We have a deadline. What can we do? How can you help me get this, ensure that I'm going to get this material on time? So the biggest thing there is the relationships, the communication. Those are going to be important as we move into this. I'm not going to call it a crisis, but it's a tough time right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Absolutely. Mr. Garcia, feel free to jump in if there's something that you would like to add to the conversation as well. Like I said at the beginning, you both come from very different perspectives on this, and we'd love to hear them both while we're waiting for questions from our audience.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
I'd love to jump in here, Terry. And Frank, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because this is one of the primary things that we teach students in our classes, the importance of relationships. And what I tell my students is that today, competition is not between individual companies. Competition is between supply chains. And when supply chains can share best practices and share quality standards and share customer data and information and market data and information and be on the same page with regard to all the things that you said, they're the ones that are going to win, exactly for the reasons that you said that. So
Yeah.
we do our best to teach that, Frank, that relationships are everything in exactly the way that you say.
And Mr. Garcia, to add to that, you also have to make adjustments and shifts within your organization to look into M&As, mergers and acquisitions, especially in this volatile market, and collaboration and strategic partnerships that will allow you to expand that bandwidth that you could encounter on a particular project and share that burden. So it's not only with the suppliers, as you mentioned, and the vendors, the relationship goes, in fact, I don't look at my competitors as competitors. I look at them as opportunities, competimates. And if we can pull together and work and collaborate, and again, that's why you read about a lot of the M&As that are going around to build broad-based capabilities, to be able to not fall in that gap where you can't pull your business out of any particular issues that you're dealing with. So those are going to be real keys. And I think you're going to see a lot of that happening as we move into 2023 and 2026.
Absolutely. Frank, what product cost has been affected from the war, or for you, from the war in the Ukraine, and how have you replaced or managed those costs? Everything has gone up. We've seen price increases in concrete. We've seen price increases in steel. Concrete has gone up over 20%. We have shortages in our area of materials that's affecting our deadline. Steel has gone up 30 to 40%. Every quarter, we're seeing a 20% increase in our steel. Roofing material is up 20%. Lead times have increased anywhere from 20 to 36 weeks. On the finished part, studs have increased 30 to 40%. Furnishings are up 20%. Electrical is up 30%. We have seen increases all across the board. There's not one single item that is more than others. And so it just makes it a little bit more scary. And this is why, one, we have to be more diligent with our contracts. Read your contracts, read your subcontracts, read your owner contracts. This is a commonly used phrase in our industry, but sometimes this is going back really to that number one question you asked me is about how to manage increased costs of goods and materials and still maintaining a profitability. It goes back to again that discipline that I mentioned, but the other piece of it is sometimes the best jobs are the jobs that you don't get. You have to be very particular about those jobs, because right now is not the time to take on a project that you don't feel comfortable or you're not confident that your margins are strong. And so those are all risk factors or red flags that you should look at to determine whether you're going to go or no go. So I just really emphasize on paying attention to some of those indicators on a particular project that might lead you down the wrong path.
I wanted to add something here. You talked about the tremendous price increases. So, of course, we're seeing this inflation that's higher than it's been in 40 years. The Fed is finally acting to raise interest rates, but it's not doing much. The reason is that we are so dependent on the things that I was describing before, that the traditional methods of controlling inflation are not working, because so many of these things are outside the United States. So the Fed can't do anything to affect directly their pricing. And so those traditional methods are not working the way we expected them to 40 years ago when we had this problem. Very interesting aspect that we haven't seen before.
Absolutely, absolutely. What are some tips to determine if an external supplier is reliable?
Again, that is your network. Those are the relationships that you have formed. You can also go through, the Dun and Bradstreet to check those references. You can talk to other contractors, subcontractors, even the competition from supplier to supplier, because, talking about the collaboration that's happening now and the importance of that, I can assure you that a lot of these suppliers are now also collaborating to ensure that they can supply their clients. So I think going down that route, using your network to ensure that you have quality vendors, suppliers, and manufacturers. And then, probably the most tedious thing about what we have to do now in our industry is the follow-up. We probably, they probably hate us because we're calling every single day to ensure that truck is loaded, strapped down, and on the way. And we want to see mile markers to confirm that it's already en route. And that's sort of, I'm joking, but it really is. I mean, our team is constantly on the phone trying to ensure that material is en route, or it's being packaged, tightened up, and ready to ship. And even at that, you still can't get confirmation. I was just reading an article the other day, and there was a report from the ACG that says 75% of engineering and construction firms indicate project delays due to longer lead times or shortages of material. Further, 57% reported delivery delays, indicating that the industry has difficulty predicting when materials are going to arrive. And so when you have to deliver a building to your owner and you can't even get an accurate answer or a detailed time, they give you a range, it's very difficult to relay that to your client because, in some cases we're building schools. We have to get these kids into these facilities on time. Sure. And so it's just a very stressful environment.
So, Frank, that is a direct result of that fragmentation in the long-haul trucking industry that I was telling you about. And the fact that in that fragmentation, there's no sharing of data.
Right.
And if you could somehow, create consortia or some other, form of collaboration, then you could get better information that would help with that. But that would cost something, right? And who's gonna fork over the cost for putting that in place? Again, I think you would need some kind of government intervention to help with that, which I think would be critical for exactly the reason that you are describing.
Yeah, there's already talks of these networks that they refer to as DSNs to help contractors gain better visibility into the availability and movement of materials. So I'm kind of curious to see how technology is going to play out. This is where you have, AI and other forms of technology that can track these materials. And so, but you're right, that is going to add a cost because again, how do you afford that type of technology to be able to assist our industry, and for that matter, all industries across the board.
Well, that was one of the questions that I see coming in. How have you incorporated technology in your supply chain to face these changes?
Well, I mean, there's already technology out in terms of, BIM, Revit, being able, they have what they call digital twins, predictive maintenance, prefabrication and module construction, asset tracking, even drones in terms of layouts and whatnot. But again, that piece is going to be very important because, Mr. Garcia touched a little bit on the labor issue. I mean, that's one of those topics that I don't see a lot of people talking about, but that is a factor in this environment that we're in right now. And so, technology I see is going to be the future of how to increase the amount of labor and attract young talent to the construction industry, because that's going to be a vital role in how things progress in the future.
Sure, absolutely.
Automation, there's a lot of automation in the warehousing industry, lots of robotics. That has increased the pick rate from about 7 picks per hour to more than 140. So it's an order of magnitude increase, and it's one of the few things that's allowing the current capacity to sort of keep up. There's a lot of GPS tracking now in over-the-road trucks, which is tremendously helpful. But the thing I wanted to say here is that in all of this, these are all challenges, as Frank has talked about. But in every one of those is an opportunity. And so the opportunity here to employ new technologies for the kinds of things that Frank has been talking about, you all will never see an opportunity like this again in your lifetime. So every one of those things I talked about, whether it's ports or terminals or over-the-road trucking or last-mile delivery or automation in any one of those places, there's a tremendous opportunity there to go out, do some customer discovery, see what people are liking or needing, and then start your own company to provide it. There's never going to be a better opportunity.
Absolutely. It's always a great time to be an entrepreneur. And like Frank said earlier, challenges do present opportunity, and we can see a lot of opportunities in these cases. I'm not seeing very many or any more questions coming in from the audience, but I would like to ask each of you to please give us your wrap-up thoughts. Where do you think we're going? What do you think that we can do to get ahead of this a little bit? If you would just give us your final thoughts on this, and I will start with Mr. Garcia.
Well, thank you again, Terry. Frank, thank you as well. It's been a pleasure to be here today. The one thing I can say, you all, is that for sure, we need more people who are skilled specifically in supply chain operations management. And so we're graduating maybe, I don't know, 400, 500 students a year in this area. There's going to be tremendous opportunity in the operations and supply chain management area for people who are trained in this area. And all the things we talked about today are very specialized and specific things that require very specialized and specific training if we're going to solve them, if we're going to adapt to them, if we're going to be able to sustain the kind of markets that we're used to. And so I strongly encourage people to consider going back to school and looking at operations and supply chain management. I think equally important are blue-collar jobs associated with all the things we talked about today. In Europe, there are hundreds of thousands of apprenticeships available. These are blue-collar jobs where people come in out of high school, they go to some kind of specialized technical training, they go into a paid apprenticeship, and they become professional blue-collar workers. And there's a lot of respect for those jobs. They are as respected as engineers and lawyers and professions like that require degrees. I think we need that desperately in the United States. And there is no way we are going to make progress in these things if we don't have the highly trained professional blue-collar workers to do all the work that Frank and I talked about that so far there's nobody to do. So 160,000 truckers, 100,000 workers in warehouses that are highly automated, 100,000 last mile delivery drivers, probably 100,000 construction workers. Where are they going to come from? We need training programs and blue-collar apprenticeships that are considered professional jobs that have good benefits in order to make this work right.
Sure.
That's what the. Okay, thank you.
No, go right ahead, Ted.
No, that's okay. I'll go on for another hour. I'm sure Mr. Spencer's got some good things to tell us.
No, thank you, Mr. Garcia, Terry. No, I just leave the listeners this one thing, and again, specific to the construction industry, but I think you can make it apply to other industries as well. Is one, look at your company's metrics and plan different scenarios and risk assessments. the blueprint that I referred to earlier, truly laying out and strategically planning your moves. Pay attention to your numbers. Obviously, you need to pay attention to your bottom line, but more importantly, it's the people. Pay attention to that. I refer to my bottom line as my team. And so also be strategic on the jobs that you take on and the ones that you pass on, because that one particular job could put you under. So you need to be careful. Increase your communication. And I say increase, be more consistent with communication with your suppliers, your subcontractors, your owners, and even within your team. Again, that is probably the biggest key to some of the successes we've had, is that consistent communication. Pay attention to not just our local market, but the global. Again, your vote matters. A lot of the lobbyists, the legislation, you need to understand what decisions they're making that could potentially affect you. And so the power of the vote is there with that. I think, last but not least is again, the relationships. That is with your bankers, that is with your subcontractors, your owners, that is with your team. You need to be transparent. I think that a lot of times as small businesses, we rely on our banking relationships. And for those in the audience that are a small business, it's important that you keep your bank in the know of what is happening. Obviously, nobody wants to hear bad news, but the more honest and transparent you are, the more support you're going to get when you need it the most. And right now, we're all going to need that support as we continue down this, stressful times. But again, we have to learn from this and make sure that we prepare for the future. So thank you all for having me, Mr. Garcia. It's been a pleasure being on this panel with you.
Thank you so much. We did get a question in the chat, so I'm going to just open that up to both of you. Based on the current trend, do you think things will stabilize this year, next year, or do you see them getting worse?
Wow,
go ahead, Mr. Garcia.
That's a tough one. Terry, I don't think these things are going to go away very fast.
No, sir.
I think it's going to take 10 years for things to, and what will happen in those 10 years is supply chains will have to be redesigned to be a little bit more resilient, to be shorter, to be more diversified, but it's going to take a long time to do that. And I think what we're going to have to get used to is less availability and higher prices. Because as I said early in my presentation, that was kind of an artificial situation that was based on ideal conditions that were just not sustainable. So I think it's going to take a long time.
And do you think, go ahead, Frank.
No, I was just I agree with Mr. Garcia. I don't see this ending anytime soon. It's going to be here. I think that there's still a tremendous amount of work to be had, specifically in Texas. The market is strong construction-wise. I think there's numerous opportunities. Things still have to be built. Schools, there's a necessity. The infrastructure, there's on government facilities, there's expansion. So I think that the opportunities are going to be there. But again, you just have to understand how to be flexible, tighten the belt, look at ways to optimize your operation and see where places you can start to save, because we have to be smarter about how we approach, and we have to really look at things from a risk management standpoint and not just about filling that backlog, because essentially that was it's going to show up, and it's going to be difficult to maneuver through those situations.
Sure. Do you think that we should be pulling manufacturing to the United States and not doing so much importing?
Well, it would make long-term economic sense to do that, but that would require moving from low-cost economies to high-cost economies that are closer to the United States or back in the United States. And again, that's a costly thing. The reason that manufacturing left was to reduce cost.
Right.
And those cost reductions were driven by consumer demand. And so we're used to, and we have a high expectation of low cost things. To bring those things back, there would be higher cost, and we would have to be willing to pay higher cost. I agree with Frank that demand is strong, and it's counterintuitive that strong demand was sustained all the way through the pandemic. Demand for anything did not go down. It only went up, which contributed to the challenges we're having with availability. So I think the demand will be there. The unemployment has never been lower, so there's a lot of jobs. And so the conditions are still, quote unquote, economically good. And so we are in a good position to address these things. We're just going to have to expect less availability and higher prices.
Frank?
I mean, I concur with Mr. Garcia. I don't want to reiterate everything he said, but yeah, no. If I don't think that's going to solve all the problems. I think we just need to get creative and look at other ways to present a product that will either meet or exceed what has been spec'd out. If it's a change in material, look at other ways, innovative ways of, like I mentioned earlier, the prefabricated walls. Again, in El Paso, we're famous for our rock walls, but there's other solutions for providing or installing rock walls that already come prefabricated. So you're looking at, again, to Mr. Garcia's point, it's going to might be a little more expensive. However, you're going to get the quality, and from a time perspective, you're going to hit your mark. So it's just, we just have to get creative and look for other ways to meet the requirements specified in those drawings and specs, and share that value engineering with your team, the owners, your subs, to ensure everybody's on board and to make sure that the quality is there. And that's, and I say that because you also have to be careful that from an insurance perspective, that material, that change in material, or whatever the case might be, is going to hold. And so you don't want to get into a situation where you change a material and you don't have the strength, or let's just take concrete. You make a shift to save monies or because of time, and then you get in trouble. So you just want to make sure that you cover all your bases.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being with us again. Your presentation, fantastic. Your information, really what we needed to hear. I'm very excited about being able to share all of your information with the attendees that were on with us. Thank you again for being part of this. I saw a couple of more questions that I will turn over to our speakers and have them follow up with you in the interest of time. We have a couple of things coming up: how to do business with the County of El Paso on Tuesday, June the 7th. If you're interested, give us a call here at the Chamber. Also, our 18th annual Women's International Business Symposium is back live and in person. I know Mr. Garcia will be looking forward to this because he said he likes to meet in person. He prefers that. So hopefully we'll see you at our Women's Symposium. Give us a call. There's an early bird ticket price until June the 1st, and we'll let you know more about that. And then here's some information that Liliana Merez, who is our business development specialist, and Jessica Fernandez, our social media and marketing specialist, put together on the Navigator Grant. We're one of 5 organizations. This is a national pilot program here to assist businesses that have been impacted by COVID-19 and all of the the fallout of the pandemic. Give us a call. It's free. Let us visit with your business, do an assessment, and find out where we might be able to help you. With that, again, I'll stop my share and thank our speakers one more time, and all of our attendees for being with us. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Michael Garcia.